Good afternoon, ma'am. Good afternoon, classmate. This is our report of Group 5 about capacity planning for products and services. The next. Importance of capacity planning. First, meeting future demands for products and services. So dito, ang mga decision sa capacity daw ay may tunay na epekto sa ability ng organisasyon to meet future demands for their products and services. So, mahalagang nililimitahan ng rate of output ang pagkakaroon ng mahalagang nililimitahan ng rate of output ang pagkakaroon ng capacity upang masiya ng mga pangangailangan ng bawat tao. This can often allow a company to take advantage. For example, nung nag-introduce ang Microsoft ng new Xbox in late 2005, nagkaroon sila ng pagkukulang sa supply. So, ang naging resulta nito ay ang kawalan o pagbaba ng sales at hindi nasiyahan yung kanilang customer. Sa second naman is minimize operating cost. So, dito naman, ang mga decision sa capacity ay nakakaapekto sa operating cost nila. Ideally, ang kinakailangan sa kapasidad at demand ay naitutugma kung saan ay may posibilidad dito na i-minimize ang gasto sa pagpapatakbo. Sa pagsasagawa, hindi ito palaging na-achieve dahil ang actual na demand ay naiiba mula sa inaasahan nating demand. So in this case, maaring magdesisyon tayo upang subukang balansin ang cost of over and under capacity.
Next po is major determinant of initial cost. Sabi dun po ay nakadepende daw po sa capacity yung magiging initial cost ng company. Halimbawa daw po is pag magpo-produce daw ng maramihan, yung isang business is kinakailangan niya ng malaking budget or high initial cost na ilalabas, or kung maliit lang yung capacity, maliit lang din yung paunang gastos po. Next is often involve long-term commitment of resources. Sa capacity decision naman po is kailangan pag-isipang mabuti ang gagawing hakbang dahil nga po pang long term siya na commitment. And another budget na naman po yung ilalaan natin kapag nagbago tayo ng isip. So, dapat bawat decision na ginagawa na is mahalaga at hanggang future na siya ng company. Dapat nag-invest tayo sa pinakauna at siguradong decision po. Next po.
Affects competitiveness. Nakakaapekto daw po yung capacity planning in terms of competitiveness. Like for example po, if a firm has excess capacity or can quickly add capacity, that fact may serve as a barrier to entry by other firms, then capacity can affect delivery speeds, which can be a competitive advantage. Tapos sa number 6 naman po, makes management easier. Capacity affects the ease of management. Yung pagkakaroon daw po ng appropriate capacity planning will make management easier kumpara ko kapag yung capacity is mismatch. Next po.
Next is po yung globalization increased complexity of capacity decision. So yung globalization, isa din po yun sa nakaka-affect kumbaga dun sa capacity decisions ng isang company. Kasi the capacity decision depends on the globalization. Kumbaga kapag ma-unlad yung globalization, capacity decisions also affect the company. Next is initiate planning for them far in advance. Yung planning po, kumbaga ito yung nag-initiate kumbaga dun sa capacity planning ng isang company. So in advance, ito yung advantage ng isang company.
Capacity planning, defining and measuring capacity. Next po. Capacity refers to an upper limit or ceiling on the load that an operating unit can handle. So it means ang capacity ay ang kakayahan ng isang potential na system para sa paggawa ng goods or paghatid ng mga serbisyo sa tamang oras or tinakdang oras. Ang mga desisyon sa kapasidad sa loob ng isang kumpanya ay napahalaga sapagkat alam naman natin na makakatulong ito na matukoy ang limitasyon ng output at magbigay ng isang pangunahing pananaw sa pagtukoy ng mga gastos sa pagpapatakbo sa isang kumpanya. At ang pangunahing pagdesisyon tungkol sa kakayahan ay madalas na may mga pangmatagalang pinahihinatnan and in this chapter, ini-explain ito ang mga pagbabago sa mga pagpipiliang yon. Kapag isinasaalang-alang ang pagpaplano ng kakayahan sa loob ng isang kumpanya, dapat din isaalang-alang dito ang tatlong pangunahing mga input. Yun ay yung uri ng kakayahang matukoy at kung magkano ang produkto na kinakailangan at kailan kailangan ang produkto. The next po. So, meron tayong dalawang uri ng capacity. Yun yung design capacity, the maximum output rate or service capacity, an operation process or facility is designed for. And the second is effective capacity, design capacity minus allowance such as personal time and maintenance. The next step. Design capacity, the maximum rate of output achieved under an ideal condition. Effective capacity is always less than design capacity, owning the realities of changing product mix, katulad ng the need of periodic maintenance of equipment, lunch break, coffee breaks, problem scheduling, and balancing operation, and similar circumstances. Dito sa design capacity, isang mahalagang pasasaalang-alang lang dito is yung capacity of planning dahil ang pag-achieve ng mas maraming kapasidad ay hindi palaging isang simple matter of adding more inputs dahil ang mga bagay ay may limitasyon. For example, may isang restaurant na dinisenyo for the maximum na 120 seats upang makamit ang design capacity ay nangangailangan ng 12 na tauhan at other inputs katulad ng mga sapat na pagkain. The next po. Ito yung example nila, yung measure of capacity sa business like auto manufacturing, steel mill, oil refinery, farming, restaurant, theater, and retail sales. Yung input nila or yung effective capacity is labor hours, machine hours, furnace size, refiner size, number of factories, number of cows, number of tables, settings, number of acres, number of cows, number of tables, setting capacity, number of seats, square feet of the floor space, and the output or design capacity is number of hours per shift, tons of steel per day, gallons of fuel per day, bushel of grain per acre per year, gallons of milk per day, number of meals served per day, number of tickets sold per performance, revenue generated per day. The next po. These different measure of capacity are usefully binding to measure of system effective. So, sinasabi dito na ang efficiency ay ang ratio ng actual na output na sa effective capacity, while the capacity utilization ay ang ratio ng actual na output sa design capacity. The next po. So this is the formula of the two capacity. Pareho lang naman sila, magkaiba lang yung dun sa baba nila. Efficiency is equal to actual output divided effective capacity times 100%. And utilization is equal to actual output divided design capacity times 100%. Next po. So ito yung example for computing of efficiency and utilization, giving the following information. Compute the efficiency and the utilization of the vehicle's repair department. Yung design capacity is 50 trucks per day, effective capacity is 40 trucks per day, and actual output is 36 trucks per day. So, next po. So, the efficiency is equal to 36 trucks per day divided to 40 trucks per day times 100% is 90% ang efficiency. The next po. Sa utilization naman is 36 trucks per day divided 50 trucks per day times 100%. The utilization is 72%. The next po. The next po. So, dito, sinasabi na sa ginawang computing, nakita natin na mas maganda ang kinalabasan ng effective capacity kesa sa design capacity dahil mataas ang kinalabasang resulta or efficiency sa vehicles repair department kesa sa utilization. The next po. So, dito, ang effective capacity ay gumaganap bilang lead on actual output. Means that the real key sa pagpapabuti ng paggamit ng kapasidad ay upang madagdagan ang mabisang kakayahan sa pamamagitan ng pagtatama ng mga problema, pagpapanatili ng mga kagamitan sa mabuting kalagayan sa pagpapatakbo, sa pagsasanay sa mga empleyado upang dahil sa mga ito ay magkaroon tayo ng magandang kalalabasan ng ating trabaho. At malaki din ang impact nito para sa kumpanya. Kung magiging maayos ang lahat, papabuti ang isang kumpanya. So, dito, ang pagtaas ng paggamit ay nakasalalay sa kakayang taasan ng mabisang kakayahan at nangangailangan din ito ng kaalaman tungkol sa kung ano ang pumipigil sa isang mabisang kakayahan. The next. It is important to recognize that the benefits of high utilization are realized only in instances where there is demand for the output. Dahil kapag ang demand ay wala doon, ang pagtuon sa eksklusibo sa paggamit ay maaaring maging counterproductive dahil ang labis na paggamit ay hindi lamang nagre-resulta sa karagdagang mga variable na gastos but also generates the cost of having to carry the output as inventory. So, mahalaga na matutunan at alamin natin ang lahat ng mga ito upang mapadali at hindi tayo mahirapan. Yun lang po. Thank you.
Sa akin, determinants of effective capacity. So, dito naman po sa topic na ito, malalaman po natin yung mga factors na nakaka-apekto sa paggawa within specific time period that provided and also the amount of storage that is allocated to application. Many decisions about system design have an impact on capacity. The same is true for many operating decisions. The main factors relates to facilities, products, or services process, human consideration, operational factors, the supply chain, and external factors. Next po. Okay. So first po is facilities. Nakalaw po doon yung design, location, layout, and environment. Sa design po is nakadepende po sa laki ng facilities ang magiging design po. Kung halimbawa po na maliit lang yung facilities is dapat pipiliin po natin na design ay tama lang po na dapat kakasya doon yung ilalagay nating equipments, machine, yung warehouse, at syempre po yung spaces para sa pwesto ng mga workers. So, yun po yung reason ng design facilities is para ma-accommodate po iyon. Number 2, location, transportation cost, distance to market, labor supply, energy sources, and room for expansion. Sa location naman po, dapat natin i-consider yung pagtatayuan po ng facilities like transportation cost for shipments, dapat hindi ganun kalayo sa markets na pagbabagsakan natin ng goods or products para hindi ganun kagastos lalo na kapag maliit lang yung budget or nagsisimula pa lang po. Next is labor supply. Is nakadepende rin sa location kung Manila rate or provincial rate po. And dapat pipiliin nating location is may energy sources para sa function ng equipments like machines. Mahalaga na may sources po tayo ng energy bukod sa kuryente para as an alternative po. Room for expansion naman is if ever na i-consider natin magpa-expand in the future, dapat malawak po yung location na napili natin. Next is yung layout naman po. So, yung design dapat nakaayon sa magiging layout. Yung arrangement, bawat sections dapat chronological order po through step-by-step procedures para maayos yung flow at tuloy-tuloy yung trabaho po. Next is environment naman, like heating, lighting, and ventilating. Sa environment naman po is sa facilities like yun nga po, dapat alam at marunong yung naka-assign sa section na iyon. Minsan din kapag poor yung design and equipment, nakakaapekto siya sa mga workers. Dapat maganda at easily manage yung mga equipment and machine para makapag-perform ng maayos po. Next. Ito po yung example po ng facility design. Next po. Product and service factor. Malaki din po yung epekto ng product and service sa capacity. Halimbawa po kapag yung product ay pare-pareho, mas madali daw po siyang magawa, knowing same lang din yung design. While sa product naman ay nagkakaiba-iba tapos sa product na magkakaiba-iba tapos sunod-sunod po yung pag-produce, dun po nagkakatalo po sila sa oras na ginugol and sa design ng product. Halimbawa naman po sa damit, kunyari po bumili ako ng branded or personal design sa isang boutique. Matagal yung process pero alam ko na worth it po yun. Kasi wala akong kapareho. Unlike na mabibili sa mall or other stores, na worth it naman yung price. Kaso yun nga po, assume na may kapareho tayong design. Halimbawa naman po sa services sa restaurant. Kung sa isang restaurant, nag-offer sila ng limited menu, mas madali at mas mabilis po yung pag-serve sa customer. Habang sa kabilang restaurant naman po is nag-offer sila ng extensive menu or madami yung nakapalob sa menu. Kaya naman may konting delay sa pag-serve iba yung time yung sa pagluluto. So in general speaking, the more the uniform the output, the more opportunities there are for standardization of methods and materials, which lead to greater capacity. The mix of products or services rendered also must be considered since different items will have different rates of output. So yun nga po, nakadepende sa design ng products at service kung ito ba ay specialized or highly limited lamang o kaya naman for public po. Next po. Process factor. Quality capabilities po. Sorry, mali po yung sulat. Quality capabilities po is kung gaano po karami yung nagawa po sa ibinigay na panahon at oras sa paggawa. Dapat ma-reach po yung quota and demand na ibinigay na oras at panahon sa paggawa po nun. Quality capabilities. Malaki po yung impluensya ng quality ng isang product sa customer po. Halimbawa po, bumili po tayo sa Shopee ng sapatos. Tapos yung product, ang ganda niya sa picture. Nakaka-attract, kaya binili mo po siya. Tapos, nung na-deliver na po, nung dumating na, sobrang na-disappoint ka kasi iba yung quality nung nasa picture. At sa dumating pong product sa'yo. Parang expectation versus reality po, ganun. Masyadong too good yung pinapakita pero iba naman pala yung quality niya. Kapag po yung quality ng output natin is hindi po pasok sa standard, so doon din po minsan po nagkakaroon ng pagbagal sa process dahil sa pag-uulit. Minsan din nakakaapekto din yung productivity ng empleyado sa paggawa kung mabagal ba sila kumilos or mabilis po. Next po. Human factors. Next po. Ito naman po yung mga standards and requirements kapag po nag-hire po tayo ng workers. Una po yung job content. Dapat yung nilalaman nun ay tugma din sa kukunin po nating empleyado. O kung gusto po nating lagyan with experience po. Sunod po yung job designs. So, yun nga po, dapat yung work po ng specific po sa skill and expertise ng isang tao, kung ano po yung designated position yung kailangan. Sunod yung training. So, kapag po na-hire na natin yung sa empleyado, dapat po ay may budget pong nakalaan sa expenses sa training in order to work effectively and para na rin makabisado nila yung mga duties nila po sa work. Sana naman po is motivation is a basic relationship. Dapat na ma-motivate din yung mga worker na mag-strive hard and do better sa trabaho po nila. Yung motivational po is para ma-enjoy nila yung ginagawa nila and less stress din po. Dahil importante po sila dahil sila po yung nagmamanage ng mga machines and nakakatulong po sila sa growth ng company. Sunod naman po yung compensation. Dapat tama yung pasahod sa mga empleyado. Dapat na ibibigay yung salary base sa contribution, skills, knowledge po nila. Next po is yung learning rates. Is a high parameter that controls how much to change the model in response to the estimated error. Each time the model's weight are updated. Mahalaga daw po na alam natin yung learning rates para po malaman yung progress and changes sa company. Sunod po yung absenteeism and labor turnover. Kapag po umabsent yung empleyado, dapat po natin silang i-reach out and communicate po. Dahil malaki yung epekto nun sa company pag umabsent po. Minsan naman kapag nag-awol or tinatawag na absent without leave is doon na po nagkakaroon ng labor turnover. Kapag nag-awol yung worker, mag-hire po ulit yung company para sa vacant position. Next. Policy factors. Management policy can affect capacity by allowing or not allowing capacity options such as overtime, second, or third. So minsan nasa policy din ng company yung rule kung mag-a-allow sila ng overtime, shifts, or batches. Kung halimbawa po ay marami yung deliveries dahil sa demand ng customer, may tendency po na mag-conduct ng overtime or magkaroon ng another o kaya naman per batches. Nasa policy na po yun kung magkakaroon sila ng options or not po. Next po. Operational factors. Ito naman po is may kinalaman sa function ng equipment like scheduling. Minsan nagkakaroon ng aberya kapag yung equipment is nasira. Then yung alternative nyo po is hindi capable. So hindi po nasunod yung schedule. Then isa pang factor is yung difference in job requirements. Minsan kapag isa lang yung may alam how to operate the equipment, dahil magkakaiba ng position, dapat may schedule, may schedule po sila doon na kapalitan in that position. Next is material management. Dapat yung materials na bibili is nakabudget for planning, organizing, and controlling sa activities po, para ma-manage po nila yung mga tangible components within its business process po. Next po yung quality assurance. Dapat po yung pipiliin natin na equipment and materials ay pang long term po. Kaya naman ay garantisado, matibay at may kalidad po, para hindi po magka-problema sa output. Kasi dumadaan po yun sa quality inspection and control procedures po. Next po is maintenance policies. Mahalaga na maayos iyong mga everyday use na equipment. Dapat may sapat silang maintenance kasi minsan din kapag under maintenance yung equipment is nagkakaroon po ng delay or late deliveries ng product po. Next po yung equipment breakdown. Mahalaga na may alternative na equipment tayo kung sakaling magkaroon ng breakdown po yung equipment. Nagkakaroon din kasi siya ng impact sa capacity na minsan hindi na po nasunod yung schedule ng deliveries kasi nagka-problema sa equipment. So, next po. Supply chain factors must be taken into account in capacity planning if substantial capacity changes are involved. Supply chain naman po, ito po yung chain po ng sa suppliers, manufacturer, vendors, retailer, etc. po. Kapag sa supply and demand is apektado po lahat. Halimbawa, kapag tumaas yung price ng mga products, kunyari po dahil sa inflation, so automatic na affected lahat ng nasa supply chain po. Lalo na po yung mga small business. Isa pa pong halimbawa naman po sa customer demand naman, nagkakaroon ng changes dahil po priority yung customer. So may possibility na mag-change or improve sa output po. Next po. External factors. In other words po is yung market environment. Product standard, especially minimum quality and performance standard. Yung product po is based sa quality ng ginamit na material o pangkaraniwan lang po and sa mga worker na gumagawa ng product. Nagkakaroon daw po ng restriction sa pag-increase using capacity. Safety regulations. Dapat nasunod yung safety regulation for the quality output and to satisfy customers. Next po is union. Ito naman po yung intermediaries between sa company and employers. Minsan naapektuhan din ng union yung company, like kung halimbawa yung pag-limit ng numbers of hours at sa klase ng trabaho ng empleyado. Doon din naapektuhan kunyari bawal overtime or kung meron man, may bayad po. Next po.
Determinants of capacity requirements. Kapag sinabing capacity requirements, tungkol po ito sa dami or amount ng informations or service na pwedeng ma-handle ng isang system. Importante daw po ang capacity requirements kasi ito yung nag-i-establish kung paano magagamit ang system ng isang company. Ang capacity requirements po ay involved in both short-term and long-term consideration. Next po. Next po. Long-term considerations relate to the overall level capacity such as facility size, the basic demands pattern that might be identified by forecasts such as combinations of cycles and trends. So, under long-term capacity planning, it relates to primarily to strategic issues involving the firm's major production facilities. At pumapasok lang daw po yung long-term capacity planning kapag yung short-term changes in capacity are insufficient. Halimbawa, kahit nagdagdag ng 3 shift or third shift ang dating 2 shift working lang ng firm nyo ay at hindi pa rin nakakapag-produce ng enough na output tapos yung subcontracting arrangement ay hindi pa rin magawa, isa sa pwede mong gawin is magdagdag ng capital equipment and modify the layout of plant or planta. Pwede rin magdagdag ng additional plant space or gumawa ng bagong facility. Next po. Fundamental issues when trends are identified. Number 1, how long the trend might persist. Number 2, the slope of the trend. Thus, fundamental issue where cycles are identified. Number 1, the approximate length of cycles. And number 2, amplitude of the cycles. And meron nga daw pong demand pattern para sa paggawa ng long-term consideration which is cycles and trend. Sa pag-consider ng trend and cycles, dapat po nating pag-aralan or tansyahin kung gaano katagal or kahaba yung trend, kung may potential bang magtagal ito for a month or mga ganun po. Tapos, dapat alam din daw po natin kung gaano kalawak yung masasakop na audience ng trend or cycle. Next po. Next po. So, yun. Next naman po is yung short-term consideration. Ang concerns naman po dito is yung issue of scheduling, labor shift, and balancing resource capacities. Yung goal po ng short-term is to handle unexpected shifts and in demand in an efficient economic manner. Short-term considerations relate to probable variation in capital requirements created by such things as seasonal, random, and regular fluctuations in demand. Ang short-term capacity needs are less concerned with cycles or trends than seasonal variation and other variations in average. These deviations are particularly important because pwede po iyon maging sanhi ng strain sa ability ng system na masatisfy yung demand. Pag sinabing deviations naman po, it means an action or departing from an established course or accepted standard or in Tagalog, paglihis. Next po. Seasonal variations reflected in monthly, weekly, and even daily capacity requirements. Kaya daw po ma-identify ng isang organization ang seasonal pattern sa pamamagitan ng standard forecasting techniques. Pwede po itong makita sa monthly, weekly, or even daily capacity requirements. For example, next po. Yan. For example, ito pong nasa picture, nagpapakita ng seasonal demand pattern. So, according to this table, yearly, ang items na in demand ay beer sales, toy sales, airline traffic, clothing, tourism, power usage, gasoline consumption, sports and recreation, and education. Tas monthly naman po is yung welfare and social security checks. Weekly naman po na demand is yung retail sales, restaurant meals, automobile traffic, automotive rentals, hotel registrations. Tapos yung daily demand naman po is yung telephone calls, power usage, automobile traffic, public transportation, classroom utilization, retail sales, and restaurant meals. Next po. Service system in particular may experience considerable amount of variation in capacity requirements unless requests for service can be scheduled. Irregular variation are difficult or impossible to predict because they are created by such diverse forces as major equipments break down. Yung irregular variations daw po are perhaps the most troublesome kasi maaaring lumabas yung variations or demand na ito dahil sa mga hindi inaasahang pangyayari katulad po ng major equipment breakdowns, freak storm, foreign political turmoil that causes oil shortage, discovery of health hazard katulad ng nuclear accidents, unsafe chemical dumping grounds, carcinogens in food and drink, and more. So, for example po, yung nangyayaring pandemic sa atin ngayon is an example of irregular variation. Dahil po sa COVID, tumaas yung demand sa medical supplies, face mask, face shield, alcohol, deliveries, and more. Next po. Next ay. Importante na makuha po natin yung capacity requirements of a product that will be processed para makuha yung kailangang makalap na accurate demand. A necessary piece of information is the capacity requirements of a product that will be processed. To get this information, one must have reasonably accurate demand forecast for each product and know the standard time per unit for each product. So, yun nga po, importante daw po makuha yung capacity requirements of a product that will be processed. So, para makuha, kailangan makalap ang accurate demand forecast ng mga product. Yung standard processing time per unit, yung number of workdays per year, and the number of shifts that will be used. Yung equation po para sa determining needed capacity is unit of capacity equals processing time needed over processing time capacity per unit. Next po. Next po. Next po. Yan. For example po, department works 8-hour shift, 250 days a year, and has the figures for usage of a machine that is currently being considered. Next po. Next po. For example, yung product 1, meron po siyang annual demand na 400. Tapos yung standard processing time per unit niya is 5.0. Processing time needed niya is yung 2,000. Tapos sa product number 2 naman po is may 300 na annual demand. May standard processing time per unit na 8.0. Tapos may processing time needed na 2,400. Tapos yung product 3 naman may 700 na annual demand. May standard processing time per unit na 2.0, tas processing time needed na 1,400. So, 2,000 plus 2,400 plus 1,400 is equals to 5,800 na needed processing time unit. So, ang equation po para makuha natin yung sagot dito is unit of capacity needed equals processing time needed over processing time capacity per unit. Working one 8-hour shift, 250 days a year provides an annual capacity of 8 times 250 equals 2,000. 5,000 hours per year. Consequently, three of these machines would be needed to handle the required value volume. So, 5,800 hours over 2,000 hours per machine equals to 2.90 machines or 3 machines. Next po. The task determining capacity requirements should not be taken lightly. Substantial losses can occur when there are misjudgment on capacity needs. Learn long-term capacity alternatives include expansion or construction of existing facility. Isa sa dahilan daw po ng misjudgment is yung sobrang optimistic or mataas yung expectation ng mga marketing personnel, which is not a bad thing actually, pero kasi care must be taken so that optimism doesn't lead to overcapacity. So to avoid that, marketing and operation personnel must work closely to determine the optimal product mix needed and resulting cost and profit. A reasonable approach determining capacity requirements is to obtain forecast of future demand, translate demand in both the quantity and the timing of the capacity requirements, and decide the capacity change needed. Long-term capacity alternatives includes expansion or contraction of existing facility, opening or closing branch facilities, and relocation of existing operation. And at this point po, a decision must made on whether to make or buy a goods or provide or buy a service. Next po.
Next is developing capacity alternatives. So yung evaluating alternatives dito is an organization needs to examine alternatives for future capacity from a number of different perspectives. So most obvious dito, ang question is, will an alternative be economically feasible? How much will it cost? How can we have it? What will operating and maintenance cost be? And what will its useful life be? Also, will it be compatible with present personnel and present operations? Yun yung mga usually questions about evaluating alternatives. So capacity alternatives, yun na nga, organizations needs to examine alternatives for future capacity. So it also says here na once na yung company na identified na yung capacity requirements para sa future needs, ganon, yung next step is to develop alternative ways para ma-modify yung capacity. So yung isang alternative is it re-evaluates yung situation, hindi lang sa present, also in the future. Cost volume analysis. So it focuses on relationships between cost, revenue and volume of output. Its purpose is to estimate the income of an organization under different operating conditions. It is particularly useful as tool for comparing capacity alternatives. So yung cost volume analysis or most commonly cost volume profit analysis. Ito yung way para ma-find out kung paano ba nagbago yung variable, I mean how changes in variable and fixed costs affects a firm's profit. So yung mga companies use CVP or yung cost volume analysis to see how many units ang kailangan nilang maibenta to break even or yung cover all costs or each certain minimum profit margin. Cost designation. So, fixed cost tsaka yung variable cost. So, merong difference between the two. Yung fixed cost tends to remain constant regardless of volume of output. Examples na ito yung rental cost tsaka yung mga property taxes. Yung fixed cost remain constant for a specific period. So, ibig sabihin hindi nagbabago. Fixed na talaga siya. So, yung costs are often time-related. Example din nito yung monthly salaries for rent. Another is rent of a building, small business owner negotiates with the landlord based on the square footage needed for its operation. So, example, if the owner rents 10,000 square feet of space for 40,000, just an example, a square foot for 10 years, the rent will be 400,000 per month for the next 10 years, regardless ng profit and losses. So it is really important to note that fixed costs are not constant in the long run. Kumbaga, take the example, the rent will be the same till the business occupies the space or till the landlord decides to increase the rent after the end of the lease agreement. So may mga agreement yung mga fixed costs, yung mga rentals. If the owner decides to move to a bigger facility or pay more, the business expense would obviously go up. So, the more na mas gusto nilang lumipat sa malaking space, of course, yung payment mas malaki din. While variable costs vary directly with volume of output and its major components are materials and labor cost. Yung variable cost change directly with the output. So, kapag yung output zero, variable cost will be also zero. So, yung total variable cost to a business is calculated by multiplying the total quantity of output with the variable cost per unit of output. So, yung common example ng variable cost is operational expenses na pwedeng mag-increase or pwedeng mag-decrease based doon sa business activity. So, yung growing business may incur more operating costs. Example of wages of part-time staff hired for specific projects or a rise in the cost of utilities such as yung electricity, gas, water. So, unlike sa fixed expenses, you can control your variable expenses to leave room for profits. Next is, ito yung mga cost volume symbols. Yung mga cost volume symbols, ayan, yung how to get the, yung ano ba yung ibig sabihin ng FC, it says fixed cost, BC total variable cost, V variable cost per unit, TC total cost, TR total revenue, R revenue for unit, per unit, Q quantity or volume of output, Q BEP, break-even quantity, tsaka yung P is the profit. Ito yung mga cost volume analysis wherein may mga explanation to. Ayan. Una dyan is yung volume in units. Ito yung total cost equals BC plus FC, total variable cost. So, ang ibig sabihin nito is, asan ba yung explanation? Shows the relationship between volume output and fixed cost, total variable cost, and yung total cost. So, ito yung explanation. Pwede naman natin balikan yung pictures. So, yung unang pictures, it shows relationship between volume of output and fixed cost, total variable cost, and total cost. Yung second picture naman, ito, yung second picture, ito, yung volume in units, total revenue. It explains or it means that the total revenue associated with the given quantity output. So hanggang doon describes the relationship between profit, which is the difference between total revenue and total cost and volume of output. Yung the last two pictures naman, by drawing a horizontal line through the point where the total cost and total revenue lines intersect. Tapos yung last illustrates the concept of an indifference point, the quantity at which a decision maker would be indifferent between two competing alternatives. So yung total cost, I mean yung cost volume analysis, nagfo-focus lang yun dun sa cost, revenue, tsaka volume of output. So, yung purpose nito is to analyze and estimate the income of an organization. So, under yun sa different operating conditions. Cost volume analysis can be a valuable tool for comparing capacity alternatives if certain assumptions are satisfied. One product is involved. Of course, sa isang capacity planning, of course, kasama dun yung isang product. Yun yung center of operations. Next will be everything produced can be sold. So, mas maganda siguro sa capacity planning if yung lahat ng na-produce na product ay magbenta. Next is the variable cost per unit is the same regardless of the volume. So, yung variable cost, as I explained kanina, hindi yun, kumbaga makokontrol mo siya based dun sa mga products na nagawa mo. And then number 4, fixed costs do not change with volume changes or they are step changes. So, yung fixed costs, ito yung mga rental, yung mga salary, yung mga expenses mo in the business. So, hindi siya nagbabago. And then the revenue per unit is the same regardless of volume. So, yung kung gaano karaming product yung na-produce mo, of course, the revenue will also be the same based dun sa product na na-produce. And then revenue per unit exceeds variable cost per unit. Another capacity alternatives is financial analysis or yung cash flow. Yung cash flow is the difference between cash received from sales and other sources and cash outflow for labor, material, overhead, and taxes. So, yung cash flow, ito yung refers to the net balance. Kumbaga, nandito na nasama na lahat, na i-minus na lahat ng expenses, even the, yun, yung mga expenses ng isang business. It says here the net balance of cash moving into and out of a business at a specific point in time. So another is ang ano ba to? Cash flow is the difference between cash received and cash out for labor, overhead, and taxes. So, ito yung mga received na sales and other sources, tsaka yung outflow ng labor, tsaka ng mga iba pang ano ba to? Cash related in the business. So, another is the present value. So, present value means the sum in current value of all future cash flows of an investment proposal. Ito naman, ito yung mga important commonly used methods of financial analysis. So, kasama na dito yung present value tsaka yung payback. Payback naman is crude, widely used method that focuses on the length of time it will take for an investment to return to its original cost. Example, an investment with an original cost of 6,000 and a monthly net cash flow of 1,000 has a payback period for 6 months. So, yung payback ignores na yung time value of money. It is easier to rationalize for short-term than for long-term projects. Yung present value naman is expected value in a single value called equivalent current taking into account the time value of money. So, ito yung mga interest rates. Next is the internal rate of return or yung IRR. Ito yung it summarizes the initial cost, expected cash flows, and estimated future salvage value of an investment proposal and an equivalent interest rate. So in other words, this method identifies the rate of return that equates the estimated future returns and the initial cost. So yung mga technique na to are appropriate where there is a high degree of certainty associated with estimates of future cash flow. So sa madaling salita, operations managers and other managers must deal with the situations para ma-describe kung risky ba or uncertain ba yung isang condition. So, it's either in the present for decision theory or is often applied. Ayan, next natin is decision theory. It says here that it involves identifying a set of possible future conditions that could influence results, listing alternative courses of action and developing a financial outcome for each alternative future condition combination. So it is suited to capacity decisions kasi dun din sa wide range ng other decisions na ang manager ay ginagawa ng isang manager. So, yung decision theory, it is described as the supplement ng capacity alternatives. Kasi when you are doing capacity planning, of course, there are lots of decision theory that may occur for the company na magagamit nila if ever na, or kumbaga ito yung parang hypothesis nila, o ano mangyayari in the present and in the future kung i-apply nila yung isang alternative. Next is the waiting line analysis. So this analysis is often useful for designing or modifying service systems. Waiting lines have a tendency to form in a wide variety of service systems. So example, yung airport ticket counters, telephone calls to a cable television company, and also hospital emergency rooms. Sample lang naman yun. The lines are symptoms of bottleneck operations. So analysis is useful in helping managers para makapili ng capacity level na maaaring maging cost effective para ma-balance yung cost ng mare-receive sa mga customers with the cost of providing additional capacity. So it can aid in the determination of expected cost for various levels of service capacity. So it also, ayan, nasabi ko na. Simulation can be a useful tool in evaluating what if scenarios. So may sa mga business, maraming what ifs. So yung business simulation or yung in other terms lang is simulation, it's helpful para sa company. Malaman nila yung mga dapat gawin, especially yung capacity planning. So, yun lang po. Thank you for listening sa aming report.